They will take the more difficult route that will jeopardize the standing of the British royal family if they have to do that.
In a desolate Surrey cemetery, a horrifying discovery is made: the cheap plastic-pegged grave of Nerissa Bowes-Lyon, the first cousin of Queen Elizabeth II. Shockingly, the nation's most prestigious royal genealogy record had declared this woman dead since 1940. In reality, she and her sister had been ruthlessly locked away in the Earlswood Asylum for 4 decades, an orchestrated effort to erase a defective gene from a flawless crown. The palace's internal warfare reaches a boiling point when Princess Kate determines to unearth this scandal of the century. Armed with the amended 1963 pedigree book, damning evidence of public deception, Kate immediately finds herself in the crosshairs of Queen Camilla. As the leader of the traditionalist faction, Camilla is prepared to use emotional blackmail and a plot to strip Kate of child custody to force her to bury the truth forever in the shadows. Can the Princess of Wales turn the tables, utilizing a hidden recording device to expose Camilla's true face before millions of live global television cameras? What public humiliation and brutal punishment will the traitor of their own blood face once the crime is laid bare? And after everything, will the British monarchy collapse under the verdict of its own lies? Amidst a quiet, weed-choked cemetery in Red Hill, Surrey, in the year 1987, the polished leather shoe of an investigative journalist stepped through stagnant puddles. He wasn't looking for magnificent mausoleums or headstones carved with the aristocratic patterns of the Bowes-Lyon lineage. What caught his eye was a squalid, chillingly desolate grave. There was no marble, no royal wreaths of honor, only a cheap off-white plastic peg hurriedly driven into the damp, dark, humus soil. Written hastily in black ink on the plastic peg was a name alongside a patient identification number: Nerissa Bowes-Lyon. Died 1986. The sheer coldness of this anonymous grave stood in stark, jarring contrast to the splendor surrounding the leaders of the nation. Professional curiosity drove the journalist back to the Central Archive Library to flip through the pages of Burke's Peerage. This was the most prestigious, authoritative, and sacred genealogical record of the British nobility, documenting every birth, marriage, and death of those carrying royal blood. As his trembling fingers glided to the Bowes-Lyon branch of the family tree, a monstrous discrepancy, a profound abyss of deception stared back at him. The most trusted pedigree book in the country clearly stated in elegant printed ink Nerissa Bowes-Lyon had passed away in 1940. A shiver ran down the investigator's spine. The grave marked by a cheap plastic peg in the Surrey cemetery recorded the year of death as 1986, yet the royal record claimed she had died 46 years prior. A woman of royal blood could not die twice. This was no accidental printing error. It was a deliberate, calculated plot to erase a human being from history. Who had held the pen to cross out a living, breathing soul? Who had fabricated a paper death to deceive the entire world? Back in the present day, those dusty 1987 investigative documents unexpectedly materialized on Princess Kate's desk at Kensington Palace. Their appearance was no coincidence. Kate quietly traced her fingers over the old photograph of the plastic-pegged grave, her heart tightening at the sheer cruelty of her predecessors. But what terrified her even more was a fresh clue: the original medical files from the Earlswood Asylum had been stolen from the National Archives just 3 days ago. Kate's eyes hardened as she spotted a gold cufflink engraved with the crest of Queen Camilla's faction left behind in a corner of the archive room. The current matriarch of the palace was frantically hunting down this dark history to destroy it permanently. Camilla wanted to use her vast resources to burn every remaining trace of Nerissa, ensuring no stain could ever shake the crown she wore. The covert war between the two highest-ranking women in the royal family had officially been ignited by an anonymous grave beneath a cheap plastic peg. Kate understood that the cufflink was more than just a misplaced piece of jewelry. It was Camilla's silent declaration of war. It signaled that the traditionalists were ready to take drastic measures to protect core secrets against the curiosity of the younger generation. She knew she was up against a network of conservatives who valued preserving the monarchy's artificial perfection over the very lives of their own family members. William entered the room, his face taut with visible tension, upon seeing the object in his wife's hand. Without a word, he silently squeezed Kate's shoulder. Both knew that if they backed down now, the memory of those two unfortunate women would be wiped from the face of the earth, just as their names had been stricken from the nation's peerage book. Outside the window, the lights from the opposing palace blazed bright, symbolizing a fortified wall of lies that Kate was utterly determined to shatter. Sliding the cufflink into her pocket, she locked the 1987 file securely inside a hidden drawer, preparing herself for the perilous hunt for justice ahead. To comprehend the icy coldness of the crown, Kate had to look back through the investigative diary pages documenting a bleak night in 1941. It was an era when the world was reeling from violent upheavals, and the British royal family needed more than ever to project a majestic, flawless public image to fortify the people's faith. Against this backdrop, the existence of sisters, Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon, biological granddaughters of the Earl of Strathmore, and crucially first cousins to Queen Elizabeth II, loomed as an invisible threat. They were born with severe intellectual disabilities, unable to speak fluently or participate in grand banquets, making them entirely unfit for the immaculate mold of sovereign power. A cold, ruthless decision was forged by pragmatic minds within the palace on a dark, rainy night. The two young women, barely in their 20s at the time, were escorted from the family estate by dark-cloaked guards in absolute silence. They were permitted no evening gowns, no familiar comforts or toys. A sealed transport van sped away into the pitch black, delivering them to the Royal Earlswood Hospital, a bleak, suffocating facility in Surrey, filled with the echoes and screams of society's forgotten outcasts. From that fateful night onward, the heavy iron gates of Earlswood slammed shut completely, severing the sisters' connection to the outside world. Stripped of their precious aristocratic titles and silk garments, they were forced into oversized, faded patient uniform robes that reeked of harsh bleach. Their names were expunged from the lists of the protected. Most horrifyingly of all, throughout their 40 years of languishing within the asylum, not a single royal relative ever set foot there to visit them. Not a single Christmas gift, not one birthday card, nor even a single coin was ever sent to warm the tragic existences of these two discarded souls. Kate felt a lump form in her throat as she reached a section detailing the account of an elderly nurse who had once worked at Earlswood. The nurse recalled that whenever the image of Queen Elizabeth II flashed across the hospital's archaic television set, Nerissa and Catherine would stand up and curtsy, perfectly executing the royal etiquette they had been taught in early childhood. They still remembered who they were, and they still knew the blood that flowed through their veins. Yet those who shared that very same blood had chosen to treat them as dead ghosts. The ultimate betrayal was not an assault from an enemy, but the frigid rejection by one's own flesh and blood to safeguard what they deemed the purity of the royal genome. Camilla was fully aware of this history, but rather than feeling sympathy, she viewed it as a ticking time bomb to be manipulated to undermine the influence of William and Kate's faction. During private tea parties within the palace, Camilla began dropping venomous-loaded hints, implying that Kate's camp harbored secrets capable of destroying the royal house's reputation. She systematically isolated Kate, steering malicious rumors to paint her as a dangerously nosy eccentric in the eyes of the conservative elders. The internal squabble was no longer mere bickering. It had escalated into a sophisticated campaign of character assassination. Vicious rumors began leaking to tabloids, pulled by Camilla's strings, smearing Kate as acting erratically and becoming obsessed with old delusional myths. Every step Kate took within Kensington Palace was monitored by servants loyal to the Queen's faction. The isolation became undeniable when, during state receptions for esteemed guests, Kate's seating assignment was repeatedly moved further away from the center, a silent yet devastatingly cruel psychological punishment. William recognized the shift, and his fury mounted by the day. He knew Camilla was using an underground media network to suffocate his wife, twisting a search for the truth into a narrative of mental instability. The traditionalists wanted to prove that anyone who dared touch the plastic pegs of the Earlswood Cemetery would end up entirely isolated from the royal fold. But Kate was not someone to surrender easily to psychological warfare. Camilla's cold hostility only hardened her resolve to secure the original file. She began constructing her own counter-network, leveraging the trust of loyal veteran palace staff to gather intelligence on the movements of Chief of Clan Edward the Henchman, tasked with destroying the falsified pedigree books. The erasure did not stop at physical confinement. The absolute pinnacle of this foul crime to obliterate 2 human lives took place in 1963. That was the year Burke's Peerage was preparing a brand new edition regarded as the definitive authority for high society. Those holding the reins of power within the palace shadows made a daring and deeply unethical move. They officially penned false dates of death for Nerissa and Catherine into the manuscript sent to the printers. On crisp pages smelling of fresh ink, the sisters were declared dead decades prior, morphing a lie into a stamped, authenticated historical fact. The brutal reality was that in that very year of 1963, Nerissa and Catherine were still walking, still eating modest meals, and still breathing the stale air behind the faded brick walls of Earlswood. They were issued a death sentence while still very much alive. This was a public deception of the highest order executed by the leaders of the institution. The monarchy chose to live with a monumental lie, rather than allow the weaknesses and imperfections of their own kin to tarnish the sparkling image of the crown. They reduced 2 living women to nameless spirits left to drift like invisible phantoms. In the present day, hidden away within the secret archives of Windsor Castle, the original 1963 pedigree book, bearing manual handwritten erasures, stood as the ultimate piece of evidence that both factions desperately coveted. Kate knew that if she secured that book first, she would possess ironclad proof that the traditionalist faction backing Camilla had deliberately engineered the fraud of the century. Conversely, if Camilla laid hands on it first, the book would be reduced to ash in a fireplace, and the tragedy of the Bowes-Lyon sisters would be buried forever beneath the cheap plastic pegs. Kate soon felt the media siege orchestrated by Camilla tightening around her like a noose. Whenever she appeared in public for diplomatic events, reporters loyal to the Queen's faction swarmed her, shouting rude-loaded questions about the mental health of her family members and asking if she was intentionally digging up the past to defame her predecessors. This was Camilla's direct assault, designed to frame Kate as a mad rebel in the public eye. The Cold War between them had escalated past the point of no return, with every single move Kate made scrutinized by the hostile eyes of her adversaries. The conflict breached the realm of whispers. During an internal royal banquet, Camilla deliberately swept past Kate without so much as a glance, a calculated public signal to the entire aristocracy that the Princess of Wales was being stripped of her influence. Opportunists immediately turned their backs on Kate, refusing conversation and leaving her standing entirely marooned in the middle of the opulent ballroom. It was the most brutal form of psychological exile in high society, turning a living person into an invisible ghost, mirroring precisely what had been done to Nerissa and Catherine in 1963. William witnessed the entire spectacle, his hands tightening into white-knuckled fists beneath his suit sleeves. He knew he could not cause a scene or engage in a public argument, as doing so would spark a disastrous media crisis. He could only stand steadfastly by his wife, using his presence to anchor her. Yet deep within them, both, the fire to bring down this monarchy of lies raged hotter than ever before. That night, upon returning to Kensington Palace, Kate looked into the mirror and vowed she would not let Camilla win. The ultimate piece of evidence, the amended 1963 pedigree book, lay somewhere in the hands of Chief of Clan Edward, and she had to retrieve it at any cost. This hunt was no longer just about exonerating the dead. It had become a battle for survival to protect her own future and that of her children against the ruthlessness of her enemy. Darkness swallowed the road winding toward the London suburbs, where Chief of Clan Edward's secluded villa sat shrouded behind dense thickets of trees. Kate sat motionless in the passenger seat, her eyes locked onto the glowing screen of a compact handheld infrared scanner. The unmarked vehicle, completely devoid of royal license plates, glided smoothly through the night, wrapped in a perfect layer of camouflage that erased any standard identification traits. Beside her, William gripped the steering wheel, his jaw clenched tight with immense tension. There was no turning back. They knew that if they were even a single night late, the stamped confidential Earl's Wood medical files and the original 1963 pedigree book would be completely consumed by the flames of Edward's fireplace under Camilla's orders. William pulled the car onto a trail thick with decaying leaves a few hundred meters from the villa's perimeter fence. Without wasting a single word, the couple quickly double-checked their form-fitting black attire, which completely concealed any trace of their usual luxury jewelry. Kate took a deep breath, feeling the rapid pounding in her chest, but her mind remained sharper than ever. This was no longer the world of tea parties and rehearsed diplomatic smiles for the public. This was a literal raid into enemy territory where a single misstep could cost her everything she possessed. They approached the towering stone wall of the estate, tracking the blind spots of the internal CCTV network. The infrared screen in Kate's hand displayed 3 moving red dots, the perimeter guards stationed by Edward. Waiting for the moment, 2 of the dots shifted toward the back garden. William swiftly deployed a mechanical lockpicking tool against the latch of the servants' rear entrance. The thick wooden door yielded without a sound, revealing a pitch-black corridor, heavy with the scent of rotting wood. The dense shadows seemed ready to swallow them whole, but they forged ahead, navigating by the architectural blueprint they had committed to memory. Kate moved with stealth, her rubber-soled heels leaving no sound on the floorboards. They slipped past galleries lined with stern ancestral portraits of conservative nobility whose cold faces seemed to judge the intruders. Their destination was Edward's private study on the 2nd floor, the repository where Camilla's trusted confidant hid secrets that could never see the light of day. As they stepped onto the wooden staircase, a red dot suddenly flared to life on the scanner directly above them. William instantly pulled Kate into the cramped recess beneath the stairs, holding their breath in absolute stillness as a night watchman glided past. Once the lock to Edward's study was picked, Kate went straight to the antique oak desk, dominating the center of the room. Eschewing any clumsy destructive methods, she ran her fingers delicately along the carved ornamental patterns, searching for a hidden compartment. True to her deductions, a faint dry click echoed as she pressed down on a concealed family crest symbol. A secret drawer popped open, revealing the original 1963 copy of Burke's Peerage, its pages bearing the handwritten scratch-outs of Nerissa and Catherine's dates of death. Resting beside it was the yellowed Earl's Wood medical file containing the heartless diagnoses and the records of a 4-decade abandonment. Kate cradled the priceless evidence against her chest, a fleeting wave of relief washing over her. But their triumph was short-lived. The ceiling lights suddenly flashed to life, bathing the room in a blinding glare that dazed the couple. From the main threshold, Chief of Clan Edward stepped into the room, a smug, sadistic grin plastered across his face. Flanking him were 4 imposing security guards, completely obstructing the room's sole exit. Edward looked at Kate with pure disdain, leisurely raising a walkie-talkie to signal that they had walked straight into a trap. Edward stepped forward violently, wrenching the pedigree book and the confidential files from Kate's grasp, while William was forcefully pinned by 2 of the guards. He mockingly informed them that Camilla had fully anticipated Kate's reckless desperation to find the evidence herself, and that this villa was the perfect snare designed to catch the rebellious daughter-in-law red-handed. The atmosphere in the room turned suffocatingly tense as all of Kate's hard-fought hopes appeared to be strangled right within the enemy's palm. The tension inside Edward's study surged to an absolute breaking point as a heavy velvet curtain in the corner was swept aside. Queen Camilla stepped out elegantly, her sharp makeup doing little to hide the sheer arrogance of a predator holding its prey's life in balance. She accepted the 1963 pedigree book and the Earlswood medical files from Edward, her crimson-lacquered fingers slowly turning the pages one by one. Camilla locked her eyes onto Kate, her gaze icy cold, utterly devoid of remorse or empathy for the tragic deceased cousins. In a low, menacing voice, Camilla asserted that the confinement and erasure of Nerissa and Catherine was no crime. Rather, it was a visionary act executed to protect the honor and purity of sovereign power. She argued that the crown was never permitted to display a single blemish, and that those carrying faulty genetics had to be expunged from history to keep the institution standing. Camilla had no intention of debating or justifying herself. She wielded raw power to issue a ruthless ultimatum against Kate's future. Camilla closed the distance between them, bluntly, declaring that if Kate did not immediately cease her digging into the Earlswood affair and surrender every single duplicate document, her conservative faction would leak fabricated dossiers detailing Kate's own psychological instability to both the American and British press. She threatened to leverage her media apparatus to paint Kate as completely insane, lock her away in an isolated sanitarium, and permanently strip her of custody over her children. It was a direct, vicious assault on a mother's love and a woman's honor, a methodology chillingly identical to what had been inflicted upon the Bowes-Lyon sisters decades ago. William flared with rage, preparing to hurl himself at Edward, who stood blocking his path, but Kate firmly clamped her hand around her husband's arm. She felt the tremor of fury shaking his shoulders, but she knew that a reckless outburst right now would plunge them into an irreversible catastrophe. Kate looked dead into Camilla's scheming eyes, witnessing the unbridled greed and cruelty of a woman willing to trample over blood relations just to preserve royal privilege. Within her mind, a new counter-strategy instantly crystallized, fueled by the enemy's own vanity. While Camilla was completely absorbed in gloating over her victory and delivering her emotional blackmail, Kate's hand subtly drifted down to the pearl brooch pinned to her chest. It was no mere ornament. It was a sub-miniature digital recording device capable of high-definition, multi-directional audio capture. With an incredibly discreet motion, Kate pressed the core of the pearl to activate the recording system. She intentionally maintained her silence, allowing Camilla to continue pouring out her vile confessions regarding the deliberate fabrication of the graves, the abandonment of the cousins, and the psychotic plot to smear her mental health. Camilla left the villa fully convinced that Kate had been completely broken by the ruthless threat regarding her children. She commanded Edward to lock the pedigree book and the medical files into a secure vault, then turned on her heel toward her waiting car, certain she had definitively snuffed out the Welsh daughter-in-law's rebellion. The suburban estate slipped back into silence as the antagonists departed, leaving Kate and William standing in the dim room. Yet in Kate's possession now lay a weapon of mass destruction, aimed squarely at the Queen's reputation. Every single word of her cold-blooded confession was safely stored on the device's memory card. In the days that followed, Buckingham Palace was cloaked in a suffocating atmosphere of Cold War. Certain that she held all the cards, Camilla aggressively finalized preparations for a monumental event, an international royal banquet, attended by hundreds of aristocratic dignitaries from across the globe and broadcast live by major television networks. Camilla intended to use this grand stage to solidify her absolute dominance before the world, while simultaneously executing the first phase of her plan to isolate Kate by relegating the Wales's seating arrangement to a hidden, obscured corner of the Great Hall, a public psychological humiliation within the realm of courtly intrigue. However, a cataclysmic fracture emerged from deep within the antagonist faction itself, sparked by Camilla's own greed and self-absorption. On the eve of the grand banquet, as Kate was traversing a dark, deserted corridor leading toward Kensington Palace's restricted library, a shadow abruptly materialized from a recess. It was Chief of Clan Edward Camilla's most trusted henchman. His face bore none of the smugness from the night at the suburban villa. Instead, it was contorted with absolute terror and profound rage. Looking around hyper-vigilantly, he approached Kate and extended a small memory card. Edward had been left with no choice but to betray his master. He had uncovered an encrypted document on Camilla's computer, revealing that she had already prepared a contingency plan to dump the entire culpability of the historical Earlswood scandal onto Edward's family, should the press ever fully crack the story open. Camilla intended to use Edward as a sacrificial pawn to keep her own crown pristine. The Queen's heartless betrayal of her most loyal subordinate forced Edward into a last-minute turn to save his own skin. He handed Kate the memory card containing the master access codes to the entire audio lighting and massive LED display network of the International Banquet Hall. Kate accepted the card, her eyes flashing with a cold, unwavering determination. She knew this was the absolute final piece required to complete the trap for Camilla. The villains had turned on one another for self-interest, and now it was time for justice to deliver the fatal blow. Throughout that entire night, William and Kate worked covertly alongside a fiercely loyal technician, integrating the audio confession captured by the pearl brooch and a video clip of Camilla arrogantly admitting to the erasure of the sisters at the villa straight into the palace's live broadcast control system. The following day, the Grand Hall of Buckingham Palace blazed with magnificent opulent lighting and the strains of sophisticated classical music. Cloaked in a breathtaking gown and crowned with a dazzling diamond-encrusted tiara, Camilla leisurely ascended the podium to address hundreds of heads of state and global live television cameras. She smiled with triumphant satisfaction, casting her eyes toward the obscured corner of the hall where Kate stood in silence, projecting an eerily calm demeanor. Camilla was utterly confident that she was at the pinnacle of her glory and that the Earlswood secret was buried for eternity. Just as Camilla stepped up to the microphone and prepared to speak, the entirety of the background music abruptly cut out. The sudden total silence caused a wave of whispers to ripple through the audience. Camilla frowned, looking sharply toward the tech crew. But before she could react, the gargantuan LED screen behind the podium flashed with a blinding light. It began broadcasting a tight close-up video of Camilla's arrogant face back at the suburban villa, her cold, ruthless voice echoing through the high-power speaker system across the entire banquet hall. The entire conspiracy to erase her disabled cousins and the threat to strip Kate of her children was laid bare to a stunned and horrified world. The entire banquet hall fell into a spine-chilling silence before erupting into a tidal wave of chaos, outrage, and absolute bewilderment. Hundreds of aristocratic guests, heads of state, and millions of viewers watching the live broadcast witnessed the filthy true face of the exalted queen. Her cold-blooded admissions of fabricating graves with cheap plastic pegs and abandoning two biological first cousins to languish for 40 years at the Earlswood Asylum just to preserve royal purity echoed like a definitive sentence, nailing Camilla's honor to the wall. Indisputable and impossible to cover up with any press release, Camilla stood paralyzed on the stage, her face completely drained of color, her lips trembling without sound. Retribution against her mind and authority was executed brutally. and without a shred of mercy, right before the lenses of the global media. King Charles, standing immediately beside Camilla, looked at her with eyes brimming with absolute disgust, ignominy, and fury for dragging his family's entire legacy into a mire of deception. He coldly turned his back on her and walked away, abandoning his wife to the absolute epicenter of public humiliation. Immediately, by the supreme command of Prince William Inner Palace, guards ascended the stage publicly, stripping the glittering tiara from Camilla's head and removing her noble velvet robe before hundreds of rolling cameras. Camilla was expelled from the banquet hall, immediately moving amidst the total ostracization and utter contempt of the assembled guests. Escorted by guards to a waiting black vehicle at the rear exit, she was driven away into exile and solitary confinement at a desolate, remote estate in the Scottish Highlands. Every high society privilege, wealth, and right was stripped from her permanently. Her name was expunged from all future public events, condemning her to spend the remainder of her days in isolation and deep shame, an exact mirror of the fate she had dealt to her tragic flesh and blood. Justice for Nerissa and Catherine had been reclaimed through a brutal but thoroughly deserved judgment. Yet the triumph of the righteous was far from unblemished, coming at a steep emotional cost and destroying internal peace. As Camilla was dragged away, Kate caught the cold, venomous glares directed at her by the remaining members of the traditionalist faction. The fracture within the palace had ripped too deep to ever heal, and William found himself facing immense psychological pressure from the family elders for allowing his wife to expose the monarchy's darkest secrets to the world. The atmosphere between the couple after the banquet was enveloped in a chilling loneliness, knowing that while they had chosen the path of justice, they had shattered their family's facade of peace with their own hands. A month after the earth-shaking purge, the scene at the quiet cemetery in Red Hill, Surrey, had completely transformed. The cheap cold plastic peg marking Nerissa Bowes-Lyon's resting place had been entirely removed. In its place stood a luxurious tomb of pure white marble, elegantly engraved with her full name and the glorious aristocratic titles belonging to her and her sister Catherine. Kate stood before the new monument beneath a quiet twilight sky, gently laying down 2 white roses as a belated apology on behalf of those who came before. The truth had been restored. The souls of the obliterated had finally been recognized before national history. But as Kate turned to walk back to her car, a former palace servant suddenly brushed past her, secretly slipping a small black envelope into her coat pocket before vanishing into the gathering fog. Kate stopped, opened the envelope, and felt her entire body run ice cold at the sight of the handwritten text in crimson ink inside. You found the 1941 Earlswood secret, but you don't know what we really did to Diana in 1997. A brand new threat, a deeper and infinitely more terrifying darkness, began to unfold, promising the next life and death struggle for the woman of Wales. What do you think about these 2 buried royal figures? Did they deserve to reclaim justice? And is the British royal family, or any other monarchy, still hiding imperfect members from the public eye? And what did they really do to beloved Princess Diana in 1997? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.